Appeals. We're going to have a presentation by Anastasia Urban and an overview of the building codes.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to call a roll?
I would, please. Thank you.
Anne Marie Kaiser. Jeff Eby.
Here.
Donna Flaherty. Randy Houchin.
Here.
Dustin Hubbard.
Here.
Ron Mansky. And Chairman Mitchell.
Here.
There is a quorum. And a reminder that tonight is a study session and we are recording, so reminder to speak into the microphone, and I will try to do better of that as well, so we can have a clear recording. My name is Anastasia Urban. I'm the Development Services Manager within the Community Development Department here at the city. Tonight's study session is essentially an overview of the building codes, how they're adopted, what ICC's role in building codes is, who is ICC, and how we use these codes to navigate through our plan review and permitting processes. I really want it to be an interactive session, so please feel free to jump in, ask questions, clarifications. If I'm using terminology that isn't clear, I'm happy to go back and provide clarification. So again, as I stated, I want to talk about the International Code Council, very commonly referred to as ICC, very common in the industry, and it's an international standard, but widely adopted throughout the U.S. as well. And then also talk about the City of Littleton Code, and then we'll navigate the resources and walk you through some of the websites, because we have books and we have websites, and you have to read them together to understand all of the requirements of the code. The International Code Council, ICC, is established or was established in 1994, and essentially it was a conglomeration that replaced legacy codes. You might have heard of BOCA or UBC previously. Those were controlling some of the controlling building codes throughout the country. They were very regionally based in small organizations, kind of supporting those organizations, but again, a lot of the fundamentals of building and fire code are similar, and by pooling resources together and developing a consolidated model of codes, it allows for an entire country and again internationally to study codes, provide updates during hearings, lessons learned, updates for technology. So the ICC is a really efficient manner to review and publish new codes. The ICC as an organization, they provide publications, certification, training, and technical support. So they're a really full service agency. They have a website that we can walk through as well, but primarily the code books are really what we rely on most of the time, and I have a couple samples of the code book, but the full series of code books is a shelf long, essentially. And ICC does publish new codes on a 3-year cycle, 2012, 2015, working on publishing the 2018. Currently, the City of Littleton is under the 2012 family of codes.
Now, is there a companion fire code?
There is.
Okay.
And how long does it take? When will Littleton be using the 2015?
So right now we're currently using the 2012. We haven't begun the adoption process of the 2015 yet. We're discussing internally of 2015 or potentially going to a 6-year cycle in 2018, okay. Because again, the 2018 cycle, we're in 2017 now. Those code books will be published soon, and so is it worth it to do 2015? And as we talk about how we adopt the codes, there's different ways to adopt the codes.
Is it because there's if there's an important adoption change, then you take a look at the 3-year cycle, but if nothing earth-shattering, then we're talking typically about a 6-year cycle?
Each municipality and region varies. I think in general, the City of Littleton was following a 3-year cycle. It is a pretty labor-intensive process to appropriately review codes and adopt them, because as we dive into the code books, for example, so what I have on the screen is kind of the family of codes. And so when we refer to building codes, there's the IBC, International Building Code, typically addresses commercial buildings. But then there's the residential code and the plumbing code and the fuel gas code. And so again, those books all compile the family of codes.
What happens if you're a suburb, Littleton or Englewood or Lakewood, and you have Denver adopting the 2015, Littleton's running on the 2012. How does the city and the contractor, builder, work back and forth between the changes in those codes?
So once a code cycle is adopted, we obviously adopt it through our municipal code. So that's the regulatory area that gives us the authority to adopt and enforce those codes. So again, it's generally published that these are the code cycles we're following. Colorado is not a state that does a statewide code. There are some states, I believe North Carolina and California, I believe, is on statewide codes. I'm not 100% sure, but I know there's a couple states that the state adopts a single code, and that is the code that all of the municipalities are required to follow. Colorado does it municipality-based, and so each municipality. So even today, if there's communities that are looking at 2015, not everyone is adopted on 2015. So I think the development community is fairly familiar with. Call the city that you're working in and find out which code cycle you're on. Okay. And so that's generally a starting point. And then for homeowners who are working on remodel projects, they may not be familiar with ICC at all. And so it's more of, I want to build a deck and what do I need to do, as opposed to, very, very few homeowners do I know own these books personally. And so we have companion guides at our building permit center to help people with some of those smaller permits. And then our permit coordinators and then the plan reviewers will meet with people and kind of guide them through. Commercial projects do require licensed architects to prepare plans, and so generally, again, those firms typically will call a city or look on the website to determine what the current code cycle is.
Would the city of Littleton, who's using the 2012 code, adopt a bit or piece of the 2015 if they think it's a critical change without adopting the 2015?
We do have that option if there was a specific code section that we felt was advantageous. I do know there are some design professionals and plans examiners that even if we're not under the 2015, we'll look at some of the code provisions in 2015 to help us understand, if there's a new section, and obviously we have to follow the codes that are adopted, but we have those things as resources as well to kind of navigate some of the code things. And if there was something that affected, obviously our day-to-day business, we have the option to adopt sections of codes, and we have the option to amend sections of codes, and that's what when I first started getting into building codes, that's what I found interesting, because if you come from the planning world or the engineering world, you have AASHTO or you have the zoning code, and zoning code is online and pretty standalone, or you have AASHTO. Or MUTCD if you're in the traffic world, where you have books and that's it. So the building codes typically are a combination of both the published ICC codes, and then most municipalities do adopt certain amendments, whether it's how we process things, Or for instance, 2012, one of the big changes between 2009 and 2012 in the IRC, which is the International Residential Code, that deals with single-family detached dwellings, and certain townhome products that are 3 stories or less. 2012 code book, if you read the code book exactly as is, it says you need sprinklers in residential dwellings. Some communities may like that. Some communities decided that, most of our communities are built out, or most of our residential products are built out, and we don't feel that it's an important thing to do based on where the life cycle of the housing product is. And so many communities amended that out of their code. And so that was a significant amendment when we adopted the 2012 code, that single-family homes aren't required to have sprinklers. Now, when you get into multifamily products, that's not changed at all. And so that stays, you read the code book clean, and that's required. But when you get to the IRC, that section R313, where the book says sprinklers are required, we say delete that section and add some more drywall on the bottom. And so that's an example of something that was significant in 2012 that many communities throughout the country, and again, that's a conversation you have with the community, that's a conversation you have with your fire marshal, to kind of develop a recommendation, and then ultimately it's the final authority. In our case, it's City Council's final authority to adopt that code. But in future code cycles, we would use the Building Board of Appeals to review some of those changes and make any local modifications.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
And can those modifications be found in the municipal code?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And that's where, again, when I started, in building codes, again, it was like, okay, you read this, and you basically have to read them together, and I'll show you how those work, shortly. But again, it's, a lot of people think, oh, your codes are online, and I'm going to read these whole books, and you're like, no, we adopt these books, and then we make changes, and even our changes, if you print them out, are about 40-some pages. But when you think about, the family of code books that we adopt, and these 2 books by themselves, now granted, so this version, this is the IBC, International Building Code. There's 2 volumes. This version that is printed is code and commentary. So there's the strict legal language of what the code requires, and the commentary that kind of discusses maybe some application or maybe an example or an illustration, where the IBC without the commentary is still this big. And IRC is similar. And so, for instance, I also brought one of the other books that are published. So this is the significant changes between 2009 and 2012, just for the dark blue book. And so, IBC and IFC, the International Fire Code, are the 2 largest books, if you will. It's really the building blocks of our building code. IRC, again, focuses really on the residential single-family detached product, and then you have these supplemental codes, plumbing code, fuel gas code, and then, although I didn't highlight them in here, but NEC, National Electric Code. And so that's a companion code. ICC publishes an electric code, but it's like 20 pages. It's not in detail, really, because generally NEC existed, and then there's also an FPA, which is National Fire Protection Association. So that's another agency that has a lot of co-codes with the IFC, but in general, your backbone is going to be in your ICC books and your NEC books. So in NEC, right now we're on the 2014. They're on a slightly different cycle,
right.
But they publish every 3 years as well. And in Colorado, DORA, which is our licensing authority, they actually have very specific regulations regarding electrician licensing and codes. And so DORA does kind of set the schedule for electric, and so we will likely be going to a 2017 electric code. And for instance, we we actually don't modify it because again, the state has a big say in the electric side. So I guess, as a state, they have chosen, Colorado has chosen to be specific on the electric code. I came from Illinois. We had an Illinois plumbing code. So the state decided we're going to have our own specific code, and you can't adopt this. You have to adopt the plumbing code.
So that explains the differences between 2009 and 12?
Yes. So when I say Building Board of Appeals is going to help us, and when I say it's labor intensive, it's great. ICC reviewed it, adopted it, it's good, but we really need to understand what those changes are. And so this is kind of the Reader's Digest version of what those changes are. And we have a lot of staff who are active in the ICC Colorado local chapter. And so the local chapter does a really great job in helping to guide us through some of these things. And there's a lot of active members in the building community that actually go to the national hearings and talk about, we're missing certain things about rooftop decks, or we're missing, some things that, continually come up in maybe new technology or new building. And so, through the Colorado chapter, they help us educate us about what are some of those changes. And then every March, they call it Class Week, essentially. And so the ICC Colorado chapter offers basically a week-long series of different codes. And it's both training-based, and it's also helping to understand some, what's coming up in the new code. So that's another education resource.
This question is going to be hard to answer, but how many staff hours would you estimate it would take to, because I think we're going to make a recommendation to City Council from an adoption period. How many staff hours to do the full adoption of the 3-year period?
So the short answer is a lot. The long answer is let's go through kind of the code structure a little bit, and then towards the end, let's talk about kind of what would be involved.
Okay.
Because again, it's to know the codes. I mean, there's some great people on our staff, and they know a lot of great sections, but to know every word and every section off the top of their head, and again, so it's knowing the 2012 codes, and then using that in your everyday life, and then carving aside time to start reading the significant changes, to really understand it. I mean, yes, there's a lot of trusted professionals who are making these recommendations and adopting them as a whole, but we want to be thoughtful in the way that we adopt things too. So again, in my last time I went from a 2006 code and a 2012 code in a different municipality, and to be honest, from start to finish, from a full project management standpoint, it took about a year.
Did it?
And so
a year of somebody full time?
Well, it wasn't full time, and that's kind of the reality of kind of our working environments. Is we don't have the benefit of having somebody who's just kind of assigned to review codes. It's fitting in between plan review and inspections, and so in the last process that I went through, it was by the books. Set up subcommittees with experts, both from staff and then the building community, and then assignments of, who's going to read this section, who's going to read this section, get back together as subcommittees. What scares you? What do you like? What is a concern from the community? What are your subcommittee recommendations? And then synthesizing that information. And so that first part can take a couple months, of time, because again, if we're involving members of the community and staff, kind of juggling time of, is it 7:30 in the morning? Is it, how do you get stakeholders who are experts in the field, and finding time for them to provide input too. I mean, there's different ways too of, let's have an open house, let's have a hearing. but someone has to still present that information to say, you know, of our 10 code books, here are the 100 changes that we think are important, and here's why. And then quite honestly, you know, some of it, and it's not exactly down to dollars and cents, but you know, if we're making changes to either delete or add, what are the cost implications? You know, and you know, to understand, you know, what that change is. And again, you know, for a lot of communities going from the 2009 to the 2012, you know, the discussion of do you adopt, and again, it was the big topic of the year, do you adopt the IRC with the residential sprinklers? You know, during code hearings, that was the single hot topic, and you know, I mean, even after staff discussed it, and you know, there's the building group and the fire group, and you know, kind of presented from a staff and committee level. I mean, we had hours of testimony, both pro and con, of why it's good or why it should be deleted. And again, that's one section of one of these books. Now, the other changes are clarifications, or you know, they're like of the what they call significant changes. You know, maybe there's 10 really big things, but you have to kind of sort through this to understand what those really big things are too.
Right. Okay.
So again, I mean, time-wise, you know, you can accelerate that a little bit, but I don't think you can do it faster than 6 months. Quite honestly.
6 months and a good percentage of a staff person's time.
Well, multiple staff people.
Would it be?
Yeah, well, because you know we have plans examiners, we have inspectors. Our inspectors are combination inspectors, so they're trained in multiple disciplines. But we have 2 inspectors who are master electricians. Well, guess what? They're going to be on the, well, granted, electric is a little different here, but let's take plumbing. So we have people who are, you know, more versed or certified in plumbing, and so you know, we want that inspector to have a say in those changes, because they're the people in the field who are seeing either, you know, the restrictions or you know, kind of the challenges all the time too. And again, it's good to have, you know, architects, design professionals, and you know, and contractors, you know, because that's where kind of that cost question comes up. And if you don't answer it during the review, you likely will come up in the code adoption. So having a diverse background, you know, of stakeholders, and again, it just takes time to coordinate that.
Okay, thank you.
So now we jump into Littleton City Code, and so this is just an overview of the chapter. We'll go to the website to show you how to access that. But basically, Title 4, Chapter 1 is the codes adopted, and you'll see, you know, IBC, IRC, IMC, all of these are books. So NEC, plumbing code, fuel gas code, property maintenance code, that's generally code enforcement focused and property maintenance. International Energy Conservation Code, that was a new code added in 2009, I believe, to the ICC family. And you know, again, different municipalities feel different about those code sections. Some are really aggressive and wanting to promote energy efficient. Some are saying, well, it's new technology. So, you know, how do you find that balance about, you know, adopting it? And again, coming from Illinois, that was actually a state mandated code. We as a local municipality, you could not be less strict or more strict. It was just, this is your code. But that was a choice made at the state level. And again, similar to electric here, NEC is pretty much adopted clean based on DORA regulations. Okay. And then we do have a reference. It helps us with some of the code enforcement things. It's an older code, but uniform code for abatements of dangerous buildings. So you know, and how do we post buildings? How do we determine if it's unfit for occupancy? There's some of that in here, but that's also been a good resource for us in the past. And then the elevator code, and that's another one where it's somewhat of a state-regulated code as well, but we have to adopt it to establish rules to say this is what we're enforcing. And then there's some other code sections that are complementary, but the real meat and potatoes is the codes adopted of, again, these are the codes that you have to follow. And again, this is kind of just the overview table of contents of the code section. So now we'll jump into the code itself, and I apologize, maybe it's a little small. But this is the City of Littleton's homepage. So if you go to, here's my circle at top, www.littletongov.org. That's our homepage. And then there's multiple ways that you can generally get at something from our website. But the city code, I find it easier to find right down here. So there's a direct link to the city code. And so when you click on that button, we'll launch that site here. So it'll bring up this page. Again. And so here is basically your link to the city code, and this is all the codes. There are some kind of shortcuts, I think, for some smaller sections of the code, but generally I select the first one because based on kind of my customer base here, I work in a lot of different code sections, but for purposes of building code, really Title IV, building regulations, and then all of Title IV is regarding building regulations, but here's that chapter 1, that I showed you an overview of. So this is the codes adopted. So in 2013, they adopted the 2012 code. So this little parentheses here shows generally when a code was last amended. When you're looking at any section of the code, and this is where the 2012 versions of those codes are adopted. And then, again, thanks to Dora, you'll see in 2015, we adopted the 2014 NEC. And again, I anticipate that we'll be doing that shortly for the 2017, because they're on a 3-year cycle, but they're off. Yes, okay. They're off from ICC, but we'll likely be doing that NEC adoption as well. And so again, this is the overview of the codes that are adopted, and then here are some administrative things that we talk about, and I don't spend a lot of time here, but really 4-1-5. This is the amendments to the codes. And so up top in 411, you saw we adopted the books. 415 is where we do the local amendments. And so this is basically, what the Building Board of Appeals would make a recommendation for. I mean, we keep probably a lot of the same procedural structure. I mean, this is where fees are adopted. This is, a building permit is required. Building permits required for a fence, a building permit's required for this. So that's where a lot of the administrative provisions come in. We have some special things that talk about historic buildings. And then, there's some general language, and then sets forth duties and powers of the building official. Right of entry, I mean, again, printed, this is about 45 pages, so trying to give you kind of a really big overview, and then if you have questions, but generally when we do plan review, when we have a question, what does the code say? So again, we know we adopt the books, we look at the local amendments to see what local amendments may apply, and then also read that together with the books. And so again, here's permits required, and I'm kind of scrolling through to show some examples of very specific sections that are amended. So there's a lot of procedural things, again, covered of how we do our business and why we require certain things, when a grading permit's required, what's needed for a grading permit, what's needed for a fence permit, what's needed for a sign permit, how it interfaces with the zoning code. So
would we look at this on our own time, like after a hearing, or would we bring our computers and look at it then? So
this section right now, again, is what I'm looking at here is available through the public face. So, but depending on, if obviously if there's an appeal, we'll point you to the applicable sections. We're not going to say look at 415 and figure it out. That's staff's job to kind of what codes apply. and we'll help you narrow it down. And again, application for permit. And so there's a lot of front end stuff again, and that's why I kind of want to provide the overview, because when you say look at the municipal code, even finding what title you're in, because depending on what your fees, and so what I'm getting to is they'll start amending the specific sections. Certificates of occupancy, again, how we do our business. Now, section B, amendments to the International Building Code. So now we say, here's the book, and then, for instance, chapter 1, we delete chapter 1, so don't read chapter 1 in this book, but read all that stuff that we put in the front. And then, for instance, this specific section. So this specific section says in section 406.1.4, so you'll go to the big book and you'll say, where is 406.1.4? And so there was a reason, based on staff recommendation, council, discussion. So you find 406.1.4. And again, it's a very physical process. Then you'll read the section. It basically says, delete that section, and here's our replacement language. So again, there's understanding the concepts. How do we know that we want to amend that? Well, it was maybe something in that significant change, or maybe something locally that we wanted to do, or enhance construction requirements because of weather or something. And then you agree on the concepts, and then you have to draft the legal language that goes with it. Because it would be great to say bullet point, I think this looks nice, but you'll see hereby repealed and deleted. And so, and so the code language is an art too.
And as an example, the soil conditions are dramatically different from the Rocky Mountains to the Midwest as to whether you pour basements or do concrete block or that kind of thing. So
absolutely,
the regional changes can be quite significant.
Roof requirements, not allowing multiple layers on roofs.
Right.
We require ice and water shield. Not all communities around here require ice and water shield. So there's a lot. And so again,
we want to see the decking, so you need to go down to the, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So again, my intent today is to really kind of just provide you a structure of how we look at the codes, how we read the codes. I don't want to, and here's a specific design criteria. So design criteria, this is the roof snow load that we've adopted for our region. This is the wind speed. This is, when you specify, and even it seems small, but, when you're doing a sign permit with a foundation and you're like, what is the wind gust on it? Because you don't want overturn or, and so there's all of this goes into how plans are prepared and how plans are reviewed. So again, if you printed this for Title IV, Chapter 1 of the Municipal Code, it's about 50 pages of changes to the books.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, it does take a lot of review to adapt to your weather conditions, your soil, whatever.
And again, region, depending on the building community and the input from local contractors, input from there's a lot of people who have invested money into properties that either want to see certain things. I've known of communities who want to prohibit certain things, and maybe that's in conjunction with planning, of saying, well, we don't like exterior insulated systems, EIFS for short, and sometimes planning says we don't like it, and then on the planning side, aesthetically, there's a concern, but some communities may say you can't use this material in our community because of that, and that's where those stakeholder discussions happen. Why are we doing this? And kind of vetting that out. And again, you in theory could adopt the code books clean and not do any changes, but that's pretty rare. Again, when you talk about that 2012 sprinkler, and it just, throughout the country, again, there were a lot of meetings and hearings about what they should do about that one section, and that's one section.
Yeah, that's a big change.
Yes. So again, it depends on your definition of change, of what's significant, but that was a significant change. And like I said, I think when the energy code was printed, different communities throughout the country either embraced it or were cautious about it. And depending on what they were trying to achieve. And when a new code book comes out too, it's a little, ICC people will kill me, it's a little like buying the new version of the car, looks great, and then you're like, ooh, until you start testing it, so a lot of communities, I believe, didn't adopt the 2009 energy code because they wanted somebody else to test it out first. And then 2012, I think there was wider adoption of the energy code because again, there's been buildings built, there's been things tested, there's, we understand kind of ramifications of it. So there's a lot of the codes that read together. IBC will have certain sections on plumbing, but then you also, for certain things you have to read the plumbing code or you have to read the fire code for the fire protection. And so rarely can you build a building with one book. Generally you're adopting that series of books and usually IBC or IRC as your foundation, and then those supplemental codes for your interior components.
Now, once the code's adopted, is there any room for a party to ask for a variance to that, or does staff need to make their decisions based strictly off what's in the adopted code?
So again, the codes are adopted by ordinance. So it's our duty to follow these codes and the local amendments. Through design and technology, there's generally more than one way to achieve code compliance. And so if we see an issue, on a new building, say you don't meet this code provision, and then, it's usually a conversation through with their design professional to say, well, I meet this code provision because of this. And so there's a lot of nuances in the code there's alternate methods. And, it depends on what you're looking to do too. Is it an energy thing? And so there's different ways to still achieve it. And so that's when you talk about code compliance paths. And so as long as you can connect the dots to say it meets it because of this and this book and this section. That's generally how we do a review. I mean, if you get to a point where, it's a 300-foot maximum travel path and it's a 300-foot maximum travel path. I mean, generally for something like that, you're like, okay, what additional safety protections does the code provide for? Usually there's alternate means of compliance. Is it additional egresses? Is it additional, sometimes a building isn't compliant, but with sprinklers it would be compliant. And so the owner and design professional kind of have to make a decision. Even building technology, it's interesting regionally. Coming from the Midwest, I saw a ton of steel construction, non-combustible construction, concrete. Generally that's type 2 construction. So when you're talking about commercial buildings, you have to A, code book, B, what's your occupancy, what is your construction type? Because under certain construction types, non-combustible, you can generally build bigger. If you sprinkler things, you can build bigger. There's maximum areas that you can build. If you're using wood frame construction, combustible, then sometimes your areas are smaller. But then you see a lot of platform buildings here where, you'll see it in the tech corridor a lot where it's maybe a steel, or podium buildings. It's a steel base, and then the upper floors are wood. And so those are two different construction types, and then how those two different construction types either are separated or interfaced. There's a lot that goes into that to say, do you meet the fire separation? Are you two, and it's hard to explain, are you two separate buildings because there's no interface between the mechanical systems, or all of the interfaces are properly fire protected. And so again, you can kind of go down a rabbit hole real quick, but that's why design professionals study the code and do that. And we work with them closely to say, okay, show me your compliance path. What are you classifying this building as? And then going back to your question on variances. So we'll talk about kind of the charge of this board and commission is to hear an appeal. And so generally, again, we look at the codes and we use the codes within the codes to meet our requirements. If staff, chief building official makes a determination and says, I don't believe you meet this requirement, that's where an appeal would come in. And so it's not explicitly a variance. It's more of an appeal, and that's where it comes into that interpretation and that code analysis of how you connect the dots and put the pieces together. If that helps.
Yep. It's not just a simple yes or no. There's a lot of ors and buts.
Correct. And again, there's a lot of resources at our fingertips. And again, sometimes it says, okay, we've got to take out that chapter, take out the book and read. And building a new building from scratch sometimes is an easier, quicker review because they're following the code cleanly. Hard projects are modifications to existing structures. What do you touch? What's required to be upgraded? What's grandfathered? What's, and you start to unravel. And so those are challenges, both from a review perspective, from a design perspective. We want to make sure it's safe. Just because something was built in the 60s and it met code at the time doesn't mean that it meets the current codes, but what does the code book say about requiring you to upgrade it? And that's something that, our field staff and our plan reviewers face every day of, it was there, I'm replacing it just like it was. Well, the code before, and we've seen it, I think we've seen it, overall, you've seen energy requirements increase for the better, but it's challenging, and we've seen stair treads and handrails and, just a lot of things have evolved, but again, the remodel projects get tough of, what is required to be upgraded, so.
Most code is for public safety.
Correct.
Let me give you an example, and you and I talked about this just a little bit. A new roof was put on because of hail damage. You go down to the sheeting, you decided you need to put new sheeting on because you had shakes and spaces were okay then because of the breathing. Now it's not okay and you're going to deck it, and now you're going to put new gutters on. Okay. If you hang the gutters on a marginal fascia board and the gutters fall off, maybe somebody gets hit on the head, but likely it's not much of a safety issue. It's maybe a foundation issue, or it's just an inconvenience or whatever. So in that case, it's not a safety issue if you put a gutter on an old fascia board and the fascia, it rather than into the joists or the rafters, it's now on something that's old and the attachment was code back then, but now the wood is weakened, rotted, whatever. Would a city then say, look, if you're going to do a new roof and you're going to do new gutters, which typically or often happens, not always, does a city get into, this is good for the homeowner, it's not a safety issue, but now we're going to protect the homeowner and change or add something that maybe is not in a code book?
So those questions come up a lot.
Do they?
Okay. Well, and we have to design to the minimum code. That's this is our minimum. If people choose to do better than that, that's great. We as a reviewer and inspector can't require above and beyond. I mean, if we're having a conversation, and quite honestly, this sometimes happens with insurance claims and roofs, where, an insurance claim, and again, we're here to do the permit work that, homeowner contractor submits the scope of work. Does it meet the code? Yes or no? If insurance claim wants to cover a portion of the roof, but homeowner wants the whole roof replaced, we're reviewing it to the minimum standards. But again, we can't, if it meets the minimum standards, we can't require, we can recommend and suggest.
Yes. Okay.
But again, cautious about that because.
But a city could, could it not, adopt or amend an IBC or an ICC because they feel that although it's not a safety issue and it's not required from that standpoint, this makes sense. This is what we want. This is protection for the community, for the homeowner, for the. So we could adopt. We could go to the Building Board of Appeals, or we could go to City Council and say, we want to make this change. It's not in the building code. It's not necessarily a safety issue. Could be, but it's really a stretch to make it a safety issue. But we want to do this because it just makes sense. If you're doing this, require that they put the screws in every 2 feet because that's where they're after is, rather than just wherever they want to a fascia board. It's almost no extra work, or no extra work to the contractor except maybe to locate where the joist is.
I think, and granted, building codes kind of do talk about means and methods, but I think there's a workmanship thing too, let's talk about drywall.
Okay.
We require drywall inspections. We want to make sure that there's minimum number of screws in there, but how they finish it isn't a code. Yes, if there's gaping holes and things like that, but
if they've taped it and the screws are kind of covered, but maybe there's some dimples. That's not your issue.
It's a workmanship issue.
That's a workmanship issue between the homeowner and the contractor. The city's not going to get involved in that.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
So kind of going back to your recommendation on and gutters aren't required in the code. They're common, but they're not required in the code actually.
If you want water dripping on you as you walk out the door, that's your choice.
It talks about disbursement, not getting away from your foundation, and how you do that. There's different ways
but you could
to
do that. With overhang.
Correct. Overhang, and there's different types of products that disperse the water too. So again, do we want to make gutters required? That's probably if we're talking about that code issue. Okay. And then even things of fences. Fence permits are required, but not every community requires. And kind of what are the challenges? What are we trying to achieve? Is fence permit safety thing? Well, it could be a safety thing, and is it also a livability item where we don't want walled communities and we don't want 12-foot fences between homeowners, and so that's where some of those code requirements weave in kind of the planning intent of a community as well too.
So in a workmanlike manner is not typically in a code, and typically municipalities don't get involved in.
It depends. If there's really blatant poor workmanship, and again, it's generally we'll come and do a field investigation. If somebody says, hey, I'm not quite sure if this was done per code, we'll go check it out, and then we'll look at the code book, and what does the code book say? If the code book says that screws are, had to be every 2 feet or on the studs, then yes, then potentially there's a violation of the code book. But if it's a, kind of a not great workmanship manner, I mean, then we also kind of coach people, there's Better Business Bureau and some other avenues to kind of help with some of those things and, kind of help, obviously, homeowners and to kind of navigate some of those resources as well.
Thank you.
So, again, Title IV is where the building code sections are adopted, and then let's go back to, I don't think I had that many more slides. So as a reminder, the Building Board of Appeals, the scope is adopted by the municipal code. It's referenced in Title IV, but all of the boards and commissions, I believe, yes, you're in Title II. So if we kind of go back to that city code section, and I can show you how this navigation. So Title II, you'll see boards and commissions, and then, sorry, we have a number of boards and commissions. Building Board of Appeals. So Title II, Chapter 4 is the establishment of Building Board of Appeals and what your purview is. And so it does obviously talk about.
And this is now on the website.
It is,
Yes.
It is, yep. And then not only section or Title 4-1-1, which again is building code sections, but it also talks about amendments to the International Fire Code too, which is adopted, but I think it's just really specific to say if there's an appeal to the International Fire Code, the Building Board of Appeals is also the appropriate agency to review that.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm curious to why there hasn't been any appeals yet, if you have any insight on that. Is it just you guys are so good, your applicants are, just really friendly, easygoing, or is this a common in a lot of municipalities that these cases aren't really denied and then appealed?
I would say it is fairly common that Building Board of Appeals do not meet on a regular basis. And part of it kind of goes to that variance versus appeal. Is it a variance or is it an appeal? And so there's kind of an intentional reason that there's not an application for an appeal because it's not, I want to vary the code. It's, I understand what the code is, or I believe I understand what the code is. I disagree with the interpretation of how the code was adopted. I want a quasi-judicial hearing regarding that. And again, ICC has done a wonderful job, incorporating all of the legacy codes, the BOCAs and the UBCs, and I mean, each year, or each 3 years, the code gets better and smarter. And so, in a way, there's a lot of code compliant paths to get somebody still a safe building that's in compliance with code. And I think, some of it may have to do with personalities at municipalities too, of do people just say no, doesn't comply, have a nice day, here's your code book, read it, versus, where our approach is really intended to be customer focused, and whether the customer be a homeowner, whether it be a developer, whether it be, we process building permits for our own remodel work, so we have a wide variety of customers. And so, again, our intent is to help people navigate the code. And so we really, we really try not to say no as our first answer. Okay. No is our first, second, and third answer, where,
And there used to be Norm Brown, who Anastasia and I have talked to. There used to be quite a few more appeals. Well, one is a lot more than what we've had.
Yeah,
so
100%
there was a fair amount of appeals 10, 15 years ago. I've been involved in a couple of them. I was also involved in where we went to city council and said we want to change the roofing code to you go down to the decking because we want to make sure the deck's not rotted, and we also want ice and water up 2 feet inside the inside wall and that kind of thing. But I'm also guessing, and this is, Anastasia can speak to this, but I'm also guessing that the code has become, as years go on, and there's more experience and there's more incidents, that the code does a better job of addressing and being more specific of this works and this doesn't. And so it's probably easier for you to go to them, is this not true? And for you to go to the contractor, the homeowner, and say, this is what it says. And it's pretty clear. They put in 3 more sentences that clarify something that wasn't very clear 10 years ago. Is that part of it?
I would agree. Essentially, I believe the code has gotten smarter, as all of us hopefully do over time. But when you look at the old BOCA codes, I mean, some years there was 1 book. And again, I'm not even bringing in all the books because I don't want to carry them back. But the fact that we have all of these resources at our fingertips, generally, we'll try to navigate the code to find a code compliant path. And I don't know personally when Chapter 34 came in, but a lot of times, when I talk about the hard projects or the remodel, retrofit projects, Chapter 34, existing structures. And so Chapter 34 helps navigate some of those, well, here's the code and here's how you interface with, I'm not touching it, versus what you have to upgrade. And actually, ICC went 1 step further, and they've done this with swimming pools and spas too.
Let me make another comment, and I think maybe a small part of why there aren't more appeals is something that I've addressed. We haven't made a change yet, but I went in front of City Council and I said the following: I'm a homeowner. Pull a permit, I do the work, I call for inspection, inspector says no. I say, well, I want to meet with your boss. So I meet with the inspector and the inspector's boss, and they say no. I say, well, I'm going to appeal. So I go to the website, and it says, if you have a question about the Board of Appeals, contact staff. No, wait a minute. That's who just told me no. And I think sometimes on occasion they might get discouraged because they're not seeing, or their first contact, and we have made some changes, but their first comment wasn't contact the Board of Appeals, it was contact staff. And so someone might say, well, they just told me no, I'm not going to bother, and I'm grumpy, and I'm going to go back and make a change. So this is something that we've discussed a little bit and made some change on the website. And I think maybe we need to make an additional change, whereas right now it shows, again, it still shows staff, but the order is different. Before it showed staff, and then it showed the Board of Appeals. Now it shows the Board of Appeals and staff, and possibly staff should be taken off of that, in that if you have a question about the Board of Appeals, contact the board, and if you have a question about code or permits, then see staff. So I think we need to, that may be a small part of it. Yep. A contractor says, oh man, I just heard no from this inspector, I'm going to call him again, I know he's that kind of thing. So
well, and I mean, I would say, not every interpretation in the field, is cut and dry, and there is, opportunity for discussion, and so that's part of that customer service perspective too. Of, I mean, everybody does a lot. Nobody knows exactly every word in every book, and so I mean, there are times that as managers or as directors, we do get a phone call to say, are you sure? Are you sure that you made the right call? And so we do step in and say, okay, how can we have a meeting, or should we meet on site to understand it, and not to say, oh well, bad call, have a nice day. Again, we go back to the code book, and is there a compliance method, or I mean, did we miss a section that we should have caught, and then say, okay, I'm sorry, and kind of correct either the field call or on the plan review too. So,
and before Anastasia, Jim Thalen handled these, and when we had an appeal, Jim Thalen would contact the board, and we would be given information, and we would meet and hear the appeal. And as time went on, and some of this is before I was on the board, as time went on, there were less and less and less appeals. Now, you could say, well, Thalen got soft or whatever, but I think it's more likely that the code just became more clear, and so there's less gray area.
Yeah.
So Anastasia or Thalen could say, no, here, this is where it says, and okay, I got it, I need to go back and make a change. So it's hard to say, but I'm thinking that a lot of it is just, it's become more clear over use.
Another area of our duties that surprises me a little bit more, there's not appeals in this area. And I mentioned this briefly to Anastasia, and I'm not sure too much on when it would arise, is our duty to hear licensee suspension and revocations. I just have trouble believing there's not some fraudster contractors out there, who would get a lot of complaints in about, and so there'd be a revocation hearing.
That's a good question. Yeah. What's the
self-policing in a way, because it's not necessarily the people who get licensed who do poor work, it's the people who don't get licensed and don't get a permit. And so we're dealing with them from a code enforcement perspective. So if people determine to take on work on their own without a permit, there's no license to revoke.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
And so again, if people are genuinely trying to do the right thing and they're coming in to get properly licensed or registered and they're providing proof of insurance and proof of workman's comp.
So you're saying that you're really not, if we're not hearing it, I guess what you're saying is that the contractors that are working in the city are doing a good job. Is that correct?
They are doing things according to code. I mean, and again, there are things that we'll talk, about workmanship, and again, generally we'll, meet with the homeowner, meet with the contractor. Is it a difference of opinion? Is it a code compliance issue? If it came down to, we had contractors, and again, licensed contractors who are habitually, homeowner A, homeowner B, homeowner C. I mean, people do fail inspections. It's not every inspection is, a pass. And so, is it, that they weren't ready for the inspection, or, there was a correction, so, we do, go back on re-inspections, and just because they fail an inspection doesn't mean that they're a bad contractor. But again, if there are patterns, obviously, of contractors who are doing, non-compliant work, and again, balancing workmanship and non-compliant. And I guess if we had people who were, not showing up and
are there
requesting payments, without doing the work, but again, generally those aren't the people who are getting licensed. It's the people who attempt to avoid the system, don't get licensed, and try to do work without a permit, and then we're seeing them. Code enforcement is meeting with them, and there's a different compliance path for that.
And are there any standards in the code, though, if a licensed person would have a lot of complaints against them, or what would be the basis that you could lead to getting revoked?
There aren't specific standards in here, but again, it's if there's habitual problems, and kind of diving into those problems, is it because there were times where we were kind of long on inspection wait times, and now we're shorter on inspection wait times. So you got to kind of collect the facts at hand of saying, okay, did they skip the inspection because there were weather constraints or some other things?
I have heard that and I think it's better, but there was some times not very long ago where they were short an inspector or two, and then the CBO left and so on. And contractors are saying, I'm not even going to pull a permit because I can't wait, or I need to apply for a permit before I start the job because it'll take 2 weeks and I'll be done in 2 weeks. They're having to, and so that's gotten better, I understand.
Yeah, so we would evaluate, obviously, the consistent issues, and but again, it's generally, the people who are licensed treat their licenses very seriously, and because they, we have copies of their certification and again, their insurance, and it costs them money to renew their license.
If I need electrical inspection, and I call on a Monday, when am I going to get an inspection?
So we are now back to next day inspections, next business
good.
day.
And is that true pretty much for all areas?
Yes. There was a patch where things were pretty tough based on kind of staffing and some other activity, but we've actually, we went out to replace an inspector, and we'll have a new inspector starting on Monday, but we brought in some supplemental help to help with the inspections and kind of did some reorganization. So right now we're scheduling back to next day.
I have pulled, in the last few years, I pulled electrical from my house, I pulled the plumbing from my house, and I pulled the sewer from my house because I was on a septic tank. And I think in all three cases, if I called on a Monday, they were there on a Tuesday.
That's great.
But then it did deteriorate for a while.
Yeah, and I mean, we've as the metro area has seen, we've seen a huge boom in construction, and depending, and our staffing hasn't changed significantly either. So, in the last handful of years, I mean, we've seen Breckenridge Brewery, we've seen Littleton Village, we've seen multiple hotels, we've seen, in addition to managing hail damage roof permits and, reinvestments and remodels and, and so there was a huge peak too. I mean, if people were doing remodel permits in 2008, that's great, but there wasn't a whole lot of else going on. And again, in the last few years, we've had a significant, through our downtown, significant demand for inspections as well, based on the, reinvestment that's happening in the community.
How are we doing on what you wanted to present?
So I am actually at our last slide, and then we were just talking about the powers and duties, and then if you'd like, I can just point you to one website or one section of our website that shows active projects. It's a little bit of a departure of the building code section, but I think it's a great resource. Actually, I'll show you two things, and we can have more questions on the building code, but it's a great resource that we point residents and contractors to. So as we were talking, and I know there was a question that came up front, so we'll start, sorry, I'm working without a mouse. So we'll start back at our home page so you can navigate. And so the one thing that we get a lot of phone calls on, and I fielded a phone call or a walk-in at the counter today. So building and development has its own header up here. And then once we click on that, the mailing address of Littleton is well beyond our incorporated city limits, well beyond. And so we get a lot of people who walk in to say, I'm here to apply for a permit, or I'm here to apply for a contractor license. And the first question we always have to ask them, what's the address? Oh, it's Littleton, but
That's a post office address.
So areas of Ken Carroll, I mean, the Littleton mailing address is huge, and so in case anyone's watching from home, Address Wizard is a great resource because people actually, I mean, we had a contractor drive in, and we typed in the address, and the address was here, and so you'll see, the white area is our incorporated city limits. So those are the folks who...
Plus trail mark, but yeah.
Yeah, yes, plus down there, thank you. So those are the incorporated city limits, but for the most part, almost all of this is also addressed Littleton. And so, again, we had a gentleman come in, I'm here to apply for a deck permit, I need to get licensed. What's the address? So it's Littleton, and so he's down here by 470 and coal mine. And
needs to be in Jeffco, right?
Yeah, and he's like, "Are you kidding? I got to drive all the way to Jeffco? I can't give you a permit. You're not in my jurisdiction." But I'm here, and I'm like, "But you're not in our jurisdiction." So that's just kind of a helpful resource, and that Address Wizard. I don't know addresses off the top of my head, but if you type it in there, it'll tell you, we can do 2255. That's our address here, Westbury. And it will tell you, should tell you, that it is in Littleton. And so if you type in an address, even if the Littleton address says Littleton in the mailing address, and it's not, it'll say in unincorporated Jefferson County, in unincorporated Douglas County, in, Highlands Ranch sometimes has some Littleton mailing addresses. There's some pockets of Centennial that go back and forth. So just a quick resource on our website. And then, and again, based on kind of a lot of the phone calls and stop-ins that we get, that's a very common question, and people try to apply to Littleton, and it may not be us. And then again, one more area. So if we start from the homepage and go to Building and Development Services, we'll go to the Development Activity List, and just want to kind of show you this resource as well. This is basically a link to active planning and development projects. So not necessarily all building permits that are going on right now. That's a goal of ours in the future, but anything that's going in for plan review, and then the larger projects that are under construction. Chick-fil-A, I believe, just had their grand opening today, and then so you can search.
You're not showing
Not every permit.
not every home improvement.
No, not yet. I mean, eventually, I think we'd like to have kind of a filter system to show that. But all of these are some sort of development activity, whether they're seeking for a new project approval or planning review. Some are hearing, some are subdivision, and then some we'll see that are under construction. And so, for instance, Carson. That's kind of by Chick-fil-A. Carson Nature Center parking lot, South Suburban Park and Rec is looking to pave their gravel employee lot. So if you click on either the dot, or if you've got some keywords and you click on that project and you go to more details, then you can see some of those plans that are under review. So again, if you see kind of either some survey work that's going on, or signs for sale, and you're curious, or there's some projects that are in various stages. Jameson Village is, starting construction by KB Homes. Plat 56, they're starting some earthwork. And you're curious to see kind of the site plans or the building elevations. This website is a great resource to use or point people to if they have questions about some activity projects. So again, just wanted to share that resource since we were poking through the website.
Well done. Thank you.
Any other questions?
How many GIS people do we have with the city?
How many what?
GIS, like specialists that do this mapping?
Thanks.
We have one full-time person.
Just one, huh? Okay.
Yes. I believe we have another staff member who's assisting us with some functions, but we have one key individual in GIS.
What are you planning on covering in 3 months? You're thinking about every quarter of...
Well, I think if we have our next session as the trial, then that would be the next quarterly one.
That's good, right. And then maybe 3 or 4 months after that,
we can talk about topics that you're interested in, and again, after tonight, you might have other questions, or you might want to dive into certain sections of the code, or certain building techniques, materials, if we need to, we can bring in.
If anybody has an idea, a month or a week from now, contact me, and let's talk about it. We can chat on the phone or whatever. There's just a couple of us, and we can chat and see if we want to. Okay, nice job.
Thank you.
Well organized. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Good. The meeting is adjourned.